So this is Casual Monday for the 8th week of the Fall 2018 anime season. I'm Theta, and as I said before, we have a shorter show today owing to my alter ego's schedule. You can use the jump links in the description to move around this abbreviated video. Looking ahead, I don't actually think we will have a Casual Monday next week. Too much is going on. My alter ego is playing host the whole week as well due to some family events. I will, however, still take a look at the 9th episode of Bunny Girl Senpai, since those have been releasing separately and consistently, and I just as soon keep that going. It'll probably be on Tuesday, just like the excerpts have been before now, so expect that, but don't really expect anything next Monday. I just don't see how there will be any spare time. So enough of what we don't have, let's look at what we do. Bunny Girl Senpai this week once again wrapped up one arc while threading elements of the upcoming chapter into the background. We'll talk about what's next briefly at the end of this. In Futaba's case, the hints we had from previous arcs centered mainly around her unrequited feelings towards Kunimi. It turns out that this is not her main issue, but is rather just a part of her character crisis. I was thus pleased to be wrong about Futaba trying to use the online account to alter the atmosphere. While that kind of trickery could be a crisis in its own right, it would characterize Futaba in a far less positive light. She did want the attention, at least Ponytail Futaba did, but as the end itself, not a means to some other end. There's no attempt to trick anyone into feeling differently about her or changing the atmosphere. In fact, we don't have any specific mention of the atmosphere at all this time, but the story still plays out in a similar way to our other arcs. Futaba reads the atmosphere around her, both now and in her youth, and she adheres her behavior to that reading. Wrong or right, it is Futaba's impression of her social situation that precipitated this adolescent syndrome effect. This matches up with what we've seen so far. Tomoe read the atmosphere perfectly and took steps to make herself into someone who fit it, even if it required her to be a different someone. Mai realized that she was the outsider and embraced it, which exacerbated her disappearing act. In all of these, it's their perception of what others are thinking that guides their actions. However, the solution to their problems doesn't actually lie in changing what others are thinking, but in changing something about themselves. Accepting something about themselves. This wasn't as obvious when we only had Mai's arc to look at, but it's clearer now. Tomoe had to accept that how she felt about Sakuto was real, even if it arose from a fake situation. She tried to come up with disingenuous reasons about why she didn't feel that way in order to return to her manufactured self and social circle, but her genuine feelings and self were incompatible with that charade. Because Sakuta accepted the real her, she was able to make the leap she needed. She accepted that who she really is might not have as many friends, or the same friends, or be as popular, or whatever, but that this would still be okay, even preferable. In Mai's arc, the romance between her and Sakuta takes center stage, but alongside that was the important step of her deciding to rejoin show business. That's key because being in the biz is something she really enjoys. It's what she really wants to do. But the consequences of being in that industry in the past led her to the swimsuit shoot that ran her off for a time, as well as her being worn down by the constant attention she gets in public. Those are the events that led to her adolescent syndrome, which had ramped up before she even met Sakuta. She had decided that acting was something she wanted in spite of the side effects, just as Tomoe had to accept the side effects of being herself. What Futaba had to accept, at a really basic level, is that just because you hate yourself doesn't mean other people hate you. Your own fluctuating self-confidence does not necessarily reflect how others feel about you moment to moment. It's almost the opposite lesson from Tomoe's arc, where appeasing the fickle and inconstant opinions of others required her to ignore who she really was or wanted. Tomoe needed to trust in herself to solve her crisis, while Futaba needs to trust in her friends. or at least trust that she has value in the eyes of her friends, even if she struggles to believe that about herself at times. Now, it takes a while for this root cause to come out. We had some suspicion that it had something to do with how she feels about Kunimi, and then it appeared that she wanted to flirt with that kind of attention from anyone if she couldn't get it from him. But both of these are just symptomatic of her insecurity in herself, which manifests as a fear of being alone. Futaba didn't care about being alone before high school. She was used to being alone, both at school and at home, as she says. Yet once she made friends with Sakata and Kunimi, she found she liked having friends. Rather than set her at ease, though, she now had something she could lose. Because she doesn't love herself, she can't understand why someone would want to befriend her. Having friends thus causes her some anxiety in much the same way that Tomoe was anxious over the thought that any wrong step could cost her friends. When Kunimi and then Sakata each got girlfriends, Futaba worried she would lose them for sure, that they would have no need to pay attention to her anymore. Her unrequited love toward Kunimi is a stressor for her, to be sure, but the actual root of that stress is the fear that he will go away. It's the reason she doesn't want him to know how she feels. It's not a fear of rejection. Rather, if he doesn't reciprocate, then she thinks she will lose him as a friend. It's much less risky to simply hide how she feels, regardless of what kind of turmoil that causes. Anyway, working backward from the real cause, we can understand how the split occurred. Glasses Futaba spun another of these quasi-physics-based theories about quantum teleportation and some other jazz, but the important part, I think, is that she proposed 2 copies of her consciousness observing her. Sakata fixes on this as suggesting 2 different personalities, but I'm not sure that's right. Rather, both Futabas want to feel accepted, but are of a split mind about how to achieve this. She's experiencing cognitive dissonance. She wants attention, she hates the attention her body earned her in the past, but using that body can earn her some of the attention she wants, looping back to the beginning. She thinks she either has to give up the attention or give up her disgust at how she is earning it. Rather than choose, though, she splits along those lines, because she can't decide which is the right choice. Now, even though Futaba is not manipulating the atmosphere on purpose, this split does still have a bit of an experimental feel to it. By existing as both sides of a difficult choice, she gets to see how well each version of herself fits into the world. Which version of her is better suited to her life? Which version is less likely to lose the attention of Sakata and Kunimi? I actually don't think she wants to go back to being one person at first. I'm not even sure I believe her when she says that they don't share experiences. For example, there is a scene in the middle where Ponytail and Sakata are at school, and Kunimi comes to the window wanting to be fanned. Ponytail does so after Sakata sets her up, but it then cuts immediately to Glasses back at Sakata's apartment, sitting in front of the fan. Kaede asks her something, but she doesn't seem to hear. She seems like she is concentrating on something else. That whole cut to Sakata's apartment is just 9 seconds, and that is the only thing that happens. What is the purpose of that scene, other than to suggest that Glasses and Ponytail are somehow aware of one another? I wondered before how Glasses knew that Ponytail was living in her house and going to school in her place if she had never actually seen her. They apparently only have the one phone, which Ponytail had possession of until she gave it away for Sakata to delete her account. What's more, we learn this time that no one else is at Futaba's house. Her parents are out of the country, and so there is no risk of people seeing the 2 of them at the same time. Yet she stays in the net cafe anyway, despite being afraid, apparently just so the 2 of them won't come face to face. Glasses also says that they probably can't go back to being the same person, while Ponytail will tell Sakata to give up on one of them or the other, that the world doesn't need 2 Ryo Futabas. Glasses will use the exact same line later on when Sakata tracks her down during the typhoon. Ponytail even states it more explicitly before the fanning event when she asks Sakata if he has decided which one of them he wants. In other words, it seems that Futaba was afraid of ending up alone again, specifically by losing Kunimi and Sakata as friends, Thus, she wanted to find out which version of herself was more likely to succeed. She knows there is a dissonance in her perception of herself. Like a lot of early bloomers, she is extremely self-conscious about her appearance. The attention paid to her in the past made her feel dirty. Thus, she has probably tried to shield herself from this attention by hiding how she looks, what with the lab coats and the glasses, wearing her hair down, being in a club with no other members, and so on. Attention was a negative thing for her. But with the advent of making friends, she gets attention that is a positive thing. The fear of losing that positive attention creates a situation where she falls back to something that earned her attention in the past, but she has never made peace with her original revulsion. Despite having Kunimi and Sakata as friends, she has shied away from drawing attention to herself, with the highlighted example of not wearing a yukata to the previous year's fireworks. Now though, she has this whole mess of complicated feelings, because aside from this positive attention, negative attention association that she already had, she has probably found herself wanting Kunimi to look at her the way anonymous voyeurs might look at the lewds that she uploads. Thus, she has the situation she wants and doesn't want, and a complex about hating herself and the attention her body can earn her, while also craving that attention from somewhere. It's way beyond the scope of what we can reasonably discuss here, but this is not the first time I've heard of someone with body image issues posting revealing or suggestive photos of themselves online as a kind of means of self-medicating. It seems a little counterintuitive, right? If you hate your body or feel dirty about it because of something in your past, then exposing more of yourself to a wide audience, or in a way that is suggestive, sounds like the last thing you would want to do. But as I understand it, it's exactly the separation the online space creates that is the appeal. This is an environment they are in charge of. It's a safe and distinct place for them to try to understand or explore this part of themselves. It's attention that they can turn on and off like a switch, a level of control that they do not have in their real life or in some past event that helped form their complex. Now, this all falls apart for Futaba when the barrier is pierced, when someone recognizes her uniform and tries to blackmail her into meeting in person. Now the true nature of the attention she has been cultivating is revealed to her. It's not at all like the positive acceptance she feels with Sakata and Kunimi. She is able to separate the two concepts more fully now, for while all of the men around her holding phones suddenly seem menacing, Sakata is instead a source of comfort and security. Where before she was wary of Sakata being outside the door while she was taking a bath, in fact it seemed to interrupt her ability to relax, after this event, she is unable to relax in the bath until she's absolutely certain he is outside the door, him and no one else. She can further separate these forms of attention after Sakata calls Kunimi out later that night. The lengths each of her friends was willing to go to for her, just because they were friends, is obviously much different than attention that arises from the way she looks. Although her crisis ends up being more complex than just a case of one-sided love, I imagine that thinking of Kunimi that way at all is part of how the two ideas got mixed up in her head in the first place. It takes demonstrating to both versions of Futaba that she is valuable to them as a friend to resolve things, and that this value is neither the attention she attracts with her physicality, nor is it dependent on the value she places on herself. Sakata's refusal to choose one Futaba over the other is in essence a refusal to suggest that anything about his friendship is qualifiable. There is no Futaba they would rather be friends with. Trying to be one person or another in hopes of having a more secure friendship is getting the entire concept of friendship backwards. She doesn't have to embrace a more attention-seeking side of herself, and she doesn't have to completely reject that side of herself, and she doesn't even have to come to a conclusion. She can keep struggling with her image of herself. They're just going to be her friend anyway. Outside of the two of them rejoining and back to a single person, there are other symbolic details to suggest Futaba is in a better place. She wears a yukata to the fireworks and puts her hair up, but she goes back to wearing glasses. This same kind of compromise in appearance is also echoed in the end credits. She confesses how she feels to Kunimi, but she does so without actually wanting an answer. She knows the answer, but feeling she can be honest about it without losing his friendship is a demonstration of progress. She even insists that he go make up with his girlfriend. I know Kamisato has mostly come off badly to us in the audience, but we have only been seeing Sakata's point of view on that. She did come to him about what Futaba was doing, and apparently didn't spread that information around. She's probably less toxic than the impression that we've been given. She's probably actually just insecure in her own way, like all the rest of these characters. Futaba, though, is unequivocally in a better place. Last of all, I just want to briefly discuss what happens next. The last scene shows the blonde idol we saw earlier on TV, who is called Doka-chan, waking up to turn off Mai's phone alarm, which means that's actually Mai. Way back in episode 1, when Sakata first described adolescent syndrome, he gave examples of hearing other people's thoughts, or seeing another person's future, or swapping bodies with someone else. It appears this last one is what has probably happened. Mai and this idol have swapped bodies. During the TV show earlier, Doka-chan had answered that her favorite thing was Sakurajima Mai, and when told that Mai isn't really a thing, she changed to the strawberry daifuku that Mai was eating in one of her dramas. In other words, Doka-chan here is an obsessed fan. However, our next episode is called Sister Panic. I don't think it is about Kaede though. Instead, there is one other sister that has come up in the show so far. Mai has a half-sister from her father's remarriage, the one that isn't as cute as she is, so Mai says. Any chance that is who this idol is? And perhaps she looks up to her famous older half-sister with something like reverence and also maybe envy? You know, so far, Sakata has been involved with all of the adolescent syndrome cases we've seen, but always in a slightly different relationship to each girl that's affected. To Kaede, he is her brother. To Mai, he became a lover. To Tomoe, he became a crush and then a trusted senpai. To Futaba, he is a close platonic friend. Whether this girl is the half-sister or not, I imagine Sakata will seem to her like a rival. If she is the half-sister on top of that, then, well, it's going to get complicated. That time I got reincarnated as a slime went mostly the way we guessed it might. Shizu and Rimuru were indeed destined to be together, and it seems that Rimuru has inherited a gender-neutral version of Shizu's appearance in his trademark slime blue. But what he also inherited, implied by the episode title, is her will. Shizu was in the middle of a journey to find the demon lord that summoned her and some of the children that she once watched over. A final quest to try to put things right. Rimuru takes over this purpose, a much more specific path than he had before, and with that, we can definitely say that we have moved out of the series' opening act. Interestingly, the other inherited will the episode references is that of Veldora. Rimuru now embodies the spirit of both Shizu and the dragon. I find that interesting because what each of them has in common is their encounter with the hero. Each of them was in opposition to her, and each was defeated. Shizu was converted into a friend and student, while Veldora was converted into a footnote, kind of. Anyway, everything about these two backstories now points our series toward that hero. Maybe not within the runtime of this season. I'm unsure if the story gets that far, because I definitely think picking up where Shizu left off will be the next order of business. Nothing about this episode changes my thoughts about those Oni in the credits also being the kids that Shizu once looked after, though it sounds like she actually watched over a lot of children over the years. So maybe some of our antagonists in the future will be children that she once looked after also. Rimuru at least has a direction for his monster empire building now, and also a strong positive link to the human world through our guild trio. So all I want to talk about with Zombieland this week is a pattern of behavior with Kotaro that we mentioned last time, as it seems even more like a pattern now. I pointed out that Kotaro originally gave the group a series of terrible names until they chose a name for themselves. Last time, Junko and Ai's debate over the role of an idol in relation to their fans was mostly solved by Kotaro telling Junko that she could be the kind of character she wanted. In fact, this time we see that in action, with Junko having pre-signed some photos for fans, but without appearing herself. Thus, it seemed that Kotaro, for all his controlling ways, is open to the girls figuring out their own identities. This relates nicely to this episode's particular crisis, which is that Lily has had someone recognize her from her past life. While that is a crisis that we have been anticipating for at least one of them, this recognition ties directly into the reason that Lily died, which was a combination of stress and the realization that she was growing up. Growing up means developing leg hair and facial hair because Lily is biologically a he, not a she, and she does not want to look like anything but a cute young girl. I'm not 100% clear on this, if it's gender dysphoria, or if Lily idolizes her deceased mother and so wants to look like her rather than her father, or exactly what. But either way, Lily wants to look like a cute girl forever, and as a zombie, she basically gets her wish. Now, this was a surprise to the rest of the girls, but not to Kotaro. When they bring it up to him, he actually challenges them in turn, asking if Lily is no longer allowed to be in their girly idol group if he's actually Masao and not Lily. But she insists that she's not Masao, but Lily, and Kotaro backs her play. Then he tosses them out with a parting shot about wasting time over such questions. Now, to be fair, the girls are more surprised and confused by the situation than actually opposed to it. The thing I just wanted to highlight is that Kotaro once again supports whatever identity the girls are choosing for themselves. That seems such at odds with the rest of his authoritarian behavior that it becomes significant in its own right. I'm not sure yet what this means in totality, but I won't be surprised if it's part of what drives him to pursue this whole regional idol zombie saving saga thing in the first place. So Bloom Into You and Gridman both will get short shrift in analysis this week, largely for the same reason. I feel like both are pivoting into their final arc without quite having wrapped up the middle of their story. In Gridman, the escalation between Kaiju and the Gridman team-up forms has reached something of a zenith, and so a major shift in the formula seems inevitable. Almost all of the secrets are out now, and they all know they're out, so next time is likely to be a big shakeup. In Bloom Into You, we had a lot of the dramatic irony of the series dispelled inside this single episode. If you've forgotten, dramatic irony is when the audience knows something that the characters do not, and the in-scene tension comes from watching the characters behave with incomplete knowledge. Bloom Into You had several of these it had built up before this week. There is how Sayaka feels about girls in general, and Nanami in particular. There is the nature of Yu and Nanami's relationship being perhaps more than a senpai looking out for her kohai. There is the possibility that Yu might have begun feeling something toward Nanami after all, and there is Nanami's wish that Yu will not actually fall in love with her. All of these secrets are revealed to be at least suspected by the people they are kept secret from. Sayaka and Yu attempt to make some peace between them, which leads to each more or less voicing their suspicions about how the other feels toward Nanami, though with enough wiggle room for deniability. It's definitely a "we're not so different, you and I" kind of moment. Then, right at the start of the second half, Yu is recalling her encounter with Nanami on the stepping stones and guesses correctly what Nanami had wanted to say. That was a pretty big reveal, I thought, and I find it odd to diffuse the tension of it by having Yu realize it anyway. I suppose it's an indication of how well Yu understands the real Nanami, but it definitely changes the texture of Yu's behavior from now on. Now, the only dramatic irony to that situation is that Nanami doesn't know that Yu suspects this desire. Yu has a few moments this time when she really is kind of feeling it towards Nanami, but she mostly keeps it to herself. However, she lets it out once when expressing her happiness over being rescued from the rain, and Nanami's reaction is pretty grave. Like, she realizes that Yu might be expressing interest in her, and she doesn't like it. However, Yu backpedals on this until she sounds like the Yu that Nanami knows. But if Nanami knew that you suspected how she felt, she might not have been convinced. She might have suspected the truth that you really is starting to lean toward her. Thus, we have the scene at the end with you drying Nanami's hair and them discussing being pampered or the tendencies of younger sisters. Since we know you might be genuine, it's a sweet scene, it's affectionate. But Nanami believes you might only be humoring her, and so while she likes the attention, the scene means something different to her than it does to you and to us. Anyway, there's a lot more in this episode that warrants discussion, like Sayaka and Yu's relationship, and the circular passing of the question about hydrangeas, and the parallels to their sisters, but alas. Maybe some later Casual Monday we can dive backward a bit, depending on what else happens. So our titular Goblin Slayer is not dead. He did not die like a nail hammered into a coffin, but he certainly tried. And so he did not recover as a matter of course, but required some high-level magic help from our Sword Maiden and a willing virgin. Implied in the conversation between the Sword Maiden and Goblin Slayer is that she herself would have been a virgin and able to perform the saving miracle alone, except for her own encounter with goblins 10 years before. If you remember, our priestess guessed last time that there may have been some past experience with goblins after her encounter with the Sword Maiden in the bath. It certainly helps explain why she would pay attention to the goblin threat in Watertown when so many others ignore the peril. She points out the irony of having someone like her, who defeated the Demon Lord, nevertheless live in fear of goblins. But that is pretty consistent with the series' focus so far, where the pragmatism and actual heroism of facing an everyday enemy like goblins casts Goblin Slayer in stark contrast to other adventurers. Just like the leaders of this world's nations, they are focused on the bigger, flashier threats posed by other monsters or the resurgent Demon Lord armies. Yet here is someone who already took down the biggest of these threats in the past, and she is kept in fear by goblins, because despite how powerful she was once in their power. It is not the severity of a danger in the context of the whole world that creates this fear, but rather the proximity of a danger to oneself. The scars the Sword Maiden bears from her goblin encounter are both external and internal. They are permanent changes to who she is, and thus also have a permanent say in her peace of mind. Goblins still exist and are close at hand. No past victory over a greater foe makes this untrue. In fact, I wonder if this whole come hither routine with Goblin Slayer is related to her experience. She talks about not being pure anymore, and her whole interaction with Goblin Slayer is fairly provocative. This seems intentionally juxtaposed against the behavior of the priestess, our virgin, who is immediately mortified at being seen in the nude. Yet what Goblin Slayer says to her is, "Don't worry, you don't have any scars." That seems like a pretty deliberate thing to say to set her apart from the Sword Maiden, no? Now, this haunting fear that she discusses with Goblin Slayer will later be echoed by him in a conversation he has with the priestess. He admits that he used to have an irrational fear that the ground would open up beneath him and swallow him up. In fact, it amazed him that no one else seemed to worry about it, despite how unlikely it was. Yet he finally accepted that he had to keep taking steps forward anyway, no matter how scared he may be, and he confesses that even now he is scared to death. He too carries scars inside and out, and like the Sword Maiden, these scars and their commiserate fear never really leave him. It seems that just as goblins are overlooked and yet are a close and real danger, we have a parallel drawn to fear itself, something also overlooked but also close at hand. That such a threat dogs the steps of accomplished adventurers like the Sword Maiden and Goblin Slayer means that this overlooked danger is probably universal. It's not the biggest, baddest, flashiest crisis around, but its ubiquitous nature makes it an enormous problem. Sharing this vulnerability with our priestess, though, I think counts as progress. Now, I'm not going to pretend like Goblin Slayer is suddenly personable and approachable, right? Like, there was even a bit this time when the priestess fussed at him for his non-specific replies to basically everything. But can you imagine the Goblin Slayer from those first few episodes opening up about how he carries a fear with him wherever he goes? Or his wonder at the rest of his comrades waiting on him to have a celebratory meal together? Or even him thanking the priestess for helping him? That said, he still doesn't grasp completely how to interact with her. Even while taking the step forward to express his gratitude, he reminds her that she is not required to help. He doesn't quite get that she wants to do this, and that having that desire framed as something she might be doing out of obligation is not what she wants to hear. It confirms that he does not understand her gratitude to him and her interest in being with him and supporting him. Still though, his brush with death seems to have loosened him up at least a little bit, and having the other four rally around him as they do suggests that they pick up on his slow change as well. Let's see. It turns out that the guy at the end of the tunnel image from last time is not a goblin, but some other race of creature. I'm wondering if it's maybe the same kind of thing as that adventurer who stole the treasure chest in an earlier episode, if you remember that. I was actually kind of hoping, though, that it was a kind of goblin shaman or something that he learned all his goblin slaying from. Because the idea of accepting help from a hated goblin, if it meant killing others, is the kind of thematic resonance I could get behind. It's not, though, and I guess this is just one more piece of his backstory that will be parceled out with time. It's interesting that this is the voice he hears when he's on the verge of death, both last time and this time while in recovery. That is, in times of high stress. I would imagine then that his transition from the boy hiding under the floorboards to the machine-like Goblin Slayer probably mostly happened under the care of this mentor. I'll be curious to learn the motives involved, though I know that may never happen. One thing you cannot accuse this series of is over-explaining. Last thing is that I just want to comment on the ingenuity and curiosity of Goblin Slayer. I spoke before of serial escalation, of the need to keep upping the stakes for series that don't have a clear myth arc. Changing the manner in which conflicts are overcome likewise helps a story stay fresh down the stretch, and it's something this series has done pretty well. Each new challenge has been met by combining the unique talents of each party member with unconventional props or methods. This time it was the dust explosion. Last time it was the early warning system of the canary and the use of human hair as a garrote. Based on his interaction with the ice cream vendor this time, I think we can expect some kind of quick freeze gimmick in the future. Priestess makes a comment during that exchange about understanding why he seems to know so much. Basically, Goblin Slayer is curious, though his curiosity tends to get applied to a single obsession. I talked before about how practice is basically a superpower for humans, and the refinement of his goblin-killing tactics stands as an example of this power in action. Something else humans tend to have is unquenchable curiosity, and in his case, this curious nature is also bent towards his obsessive need to kill goblins wherever he might find them. I'm beginning to wonder if Goblin Slayer himself stands in for humanity, or even just sentient races in general, in this grand playground of the gods. He certainly seems to exemplify the tenacity and resourcefulness often attributed to humans in other fantasy settings. And I think it's fair to say that Goblin Slayer cribs from existing fantasy worlds on the regular. Alright, that is it. Only really count on Bunny Girl Senpai next week, and then a return to normal afterwards. So, see you then.